All right, now, what happened about a year and a half ago, I was not here, but Tony was here. We had a very important family in the Detroit area that we didn't know. Their name was Meyer. And what so happens that it was the daughter of a man named Adolph Meyer. And Adolph Meyer was an industrialist in Detroit. He had some manufacturing companies that supplied Henry Ford with parts for the cars for the assembly line. Turns out she delivered a Foot Locker from World War I in a White Star Line trunk. So if you're from the Great Lakes area here, you know about White Star Lines. That was a big boat touring company all throughout our early history here on the lakes. And Tony was here. They opened up the Foot Locker, and in the Foot Locker was Lieutenant Meyer's uniform, his flight blouse that you see with the choke collar, artifacts, his canteen, which we'll look at over here a little bit later, his personal memoirs, his watch, his leggings, also then his field blouse, you know, his everyday. It turns out he was an engineer, and he also then trained to be in, I forget the squadron, I want to say 121st Squadron with the American Air Force, Army Signal Corps, as you know, in World War I. He got over there towards the end of the war, last 6 months. Here in this box is what you see, the uniform as it was, in perfect condition. Well, all we had to do was we had to take it to a trusted dry cleaner, have him dry clean it, press it out, and we put it on a mannequin, and what you see is how it came out of the Foot Locker. Now, he's a little bit taller, obviously, than Lieutenant Meyer would have been. A good probably 1.5 foot, but that's the uniform. And on it you have his World War I Victory Medal. And I don't know if you know about World War I insignias, but when the kids come in, if you look around the right-hand side, there's a red stripe. And all the kids say, well, that looks like a Marine Corps private first class stripe, you know, it's red. No, that's his discharge stripe. They got a red discharge stripe back then. He was in the 2nd Army, and I forget the squadron, I want to say the 121st Squadron. Now the other thing is, and a couple months later, Mrs. Livy is her name, the daughter, she's in her 90s, and she came by with another Foot Locker, and in that second Foot Locker were all these maps, all these engineering manuals for the SPAD 13, which is what he would have flown in France. Menus from French restaurants when he went to Paris on leave. War diaries. Oh, I flew to Colombey for a training mission with the French, and then I flew back, and then I had dinner with my officers, my other mates, you know. So he's a very colorful man, and we have what we call complete historical provenance. We have basically enough to tell his full story from his entire biography. We have all that material. So it's just amazing. You don't find this too often that you get World War I uniforms. We get a lot of World War II uniforms, especially Army Air Force, but not World War I. And then next to him, within about the same time, we were given this uniform from George McFadden, who was a flight engineer with the U.S. Army Signal Corps, I guess I would call it Air Corps then eventually, okay? And we know it's interesting because you don't see these too often either, with the almost like RAF wings, mechanics wings. And then we just had a World War II dress uniform come in. It must have been a flight mechanic or a flight engineer, because he had the same sergeant, you correct me if I'm wrong, I couldn't find it, but the same rank on his sleeve that this gentleman had in World War I. And his name is George McFadden. And so I don't know if most of you know that most of the pilots back then also were their own mechanics at times. If you watch any of those good World War I movies, Red Baron, Flyboys, you'll see the pilot wrenching on his own plane. Many of them engineers to start. So, well, just got this back out. What used to be in here was a waist gunner display, the blue suit, the boots, the suit, the mask, the tank, the heater cable, the whole thing. So, and the kids really like seeing that because they can't believe that you had to wear so much gear. And then we tell them, right, at how many miles above the earth, it's what, 40 below or 50 below, if it worked even, as I learned yesterday. And they say, well, that looks like my snowsuit. And I said, well, you're right. And I said, now can you imagine being 18, 19, 20 and going that far above the earth in an uninsulated, unpressurized airplane? So they're very impressed by that. Now, just within the last 2 weeks over here, we were given this uniform. And it's a Royal Flying Corps uniform, the tunic. And if you notice on the British tunic, the field blouse, I guess, they didn't use the choke collar. You know, they used the way the uniform, I guess, would look in World War II. It has a nice sands belt with it. This gentleman was a bomber pilot in World War I. His name was Henry Rex Waddell. He was from Scotland. He lived over basically what we would call Sarnia, Ontario. If you go north here, about 50 miles across from Port Huron, you'll get to Sarnia. And he was the bombardier on a Handley page 0100 or 0400. So if you watch those movies when they show the British bombing the front forward lines, he would be in the front. And he had 2 twin engines. It was 2 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. And they later went to a 4-engine bomber. Open cockpit for the gunner in front. 2 cockpits for and then a crew of 5. But what was really interesting about this is how we even had time to take this to the dry cleaner. This is how it was handed to us. And it turns out it was handed to us by Mr. Waddell's, Flight Officer Waddell's son, whose neighbor happens to be Robert Shones, who was a member of the 100th Bomb Group. So it's kind of amazing around here. You never know who you're going to run into who walks through the front door and is related to somebody else or has a story to tell. But what we really like about this is we've got the original wool cap and his flight helmet with the goggles and the protective mask for the oil and the bugs. So he later went to the University of Michigan and passed away in 1979. One of the other interesting things about him is that he was the personal secretary to Henry and Clara Ford most of his adult life, which was just sort of came out in the conversation with his son. So here we have, see, when was he born? In 1890, flew World War I in a bomber, got a degree from Michigan, ended up being the personal secretary to Henry Ford. Probably there when Henry Ford, you know the legend, right? Born with the lights out and passed away with the lights out at Fairlane Manor, not too far from where we were at Greenfield Village.